This is Ron Kelleher with the Inspired Leadership Podcast, episode number 521. Today's episode is entitled 7 Important Tips for Giving Feedback to the Boss.
Hello, and welcome to Inspired Leadership, the podcast for Christian leaders in the marketplace who want to be the best leaders they can be. And now your host, Ron Kelleher.
Giving feedback to the boss is not always a good idea. It can best be described with some bosses as a, quote, career-limiting move. On the other hand, with some bosses, giving feedback is more of a worst-case scenario known as a career-terminating move. I've worked with bosses across the spectrum when it comes to receiving feedback from employees. Some bosses are so wrapped up in their insecurities that anyone who questions them by offering feedback is on thin ice that may end an employee's career prospects or even result in termination. On the other hand, some bosses say they want your feedback, but what they mean is, praise me, stroke my ego, but don't you dare say anything negative. I've worked with both kinds of those bosses, and I can say with the confidence of painful lessons learned that it's best not to provide any form of feedback to them unless you already have your resume polished. Happily, I've also had the good fortune of working for a third kind of boss. This boss sincerely asks for your feedback and means it. They see your feedback as an opportunity to learn and improve, even if they disagree with your assessment. So if you find yourself working for a boss who is genuinely interested in your feedback, then by all means, give them the feedback they requested. However, assuming that you have permission to provide feedback, it's best to proceed cautiously. Giving feedback to the boss differs from giving feedback to an employee. So here are 7 tips for providing feedback to the boss. Number 1, be helpful. Begin your feedback by assuring your boss that your desire is to be helpful, not critical or confrontational. Showing is better than telling, so show your boss why something is good or bad whenever possible. When showing isn't possible, then telling is necessary, but describe why something is good or bad as precisely as possible. The key to helpful feedback is to avoid generalizations and platitudes in favor of specific suggestions. Number 2, be humble. Feedback, especially critical feedback, is best received from a humble heart. There may be things you know more about than your boss. Don't let your expertise become a source of pride when delivering feedback. There's always a chance that you may have misunderstood a situation and might even be wrong. So stay humble. Remember, there are a lot of things your boss has expertise in that you know little about. And number 3, immediately. It may be tempting to delay or even avoid delivering negative feedback to your boss, but it's crucial to deliver feedback as soon as possible. Memories fade quickly, so provide feedback, whether praise or criticism, as soon as you can, while the details remain fresh in your mind. When I was a sales manager training new salespeople, I made it a practice to provide detailed feedback on a sales call right after the call. Unfortunately, even waiting until the end of the day was bad because memories of who said what or what happened already started to fade. Number 4, in person. My preference is always to deliver feedback in person. Watching somebody's body language when receiving feedback indicates how well they understand or receive my feedback. It's also far easier to supply detailed feedback in person. It's impossible to know how someone responds to feedback delivered via email. Did they understand my feedback? Did they misinterpret my meaning or the tone of what I said? There's just too many ways emailed feedback can go wrong, so that's why I always try to provide feedback in person. Number 5, praise in private and in public. Now, most folks don't mind being told when they've done something well. Bosses are no exception. I like to praise in private when the boss handles a tricky situation well. For example, when someone distracts a meeting, taking it off track, and the boss deftly maneuvers the group back to the task at hand, a short private recognition of their skill at handling a sticky situation lets the boss know their work didn't go unnoticed. On the other hand, I like to praise work well done in public when the praise is a learning experience for others. Employees who hear specific words of commendation directed to the boss will likely emulate that behavior. For example, the boss explains a complicated business problem and the team's next steps. Commending the boss in front of the team and showing appreciation for the direction does 2 things. First, it recognizes the boss's skill, and second, it shows others what kind of thinking deserves praise. Number 6, criticize in private. When it comes time to criticize something the boss has done, always do it privately. No one likes a serious mistake called out in front of others. It's embarrassing and it raises defenses. So when criticism needs to be delivered, do it personally, privately, and as soon as possible. And finally, number 7, do personalize and don't personalize. My rule of thumb when providing feedback for bosses is to personalize praise and not to personalize criticism. I like to personalize the praise if the boss has done something well. For example, I got a lot out of today's staff meeting. I really appreciate how you handled answering the difficult staffing questions. Specific and personal praise is helpful, and it means a lot more to the boss than generic impersonal comments like, "Great staff meeting today." But if criticism is needed, I avoid making it sound personal. Personal criticism, as I said, raises defenses quickly. And as such, I won't say, "Well, you didn't handle those staffing questions very well in today's staff meeting." Instead, I might say, "Staffing questions are really challenging." That's empathetic. "Can I offer a suggestion for how to handle this type of question next time around?" And that's helpful. Now, a special note to bosses. Don't passively sit back and wait for feedback to come from your employees. Ask for it. Many intelligent people are working for you, otherwise you wouldn't have hired them, right? So one of the smartest things you can do for yourself as a leader and for the organization is to invite your employees to give you feedback and assure them there is no risk in sharing an opinion. Or you may even be more proactive and solicit specific feedback. Ask individual employees what they think and don't settle for generalizations. Instead, ask for specifics and examples. Once people realize how much you value their opinions, you'll be surprised by how much valuable insight they have to share. Well, that's it for this week, and as always, questions and comments are welcome. What happened when you attempted to provide feedback to a boss? And have you worked for a boss who actively solicited feedback from employees? I'd love it if you'd come over to the website at ronkelleher.com/episode 521 and leave me a question or a comment. And as always, before we go, I'd like to ask you to do me a quick favor. That is to hop on over to whatever podcast service you're listening to this on. Leave a ranking for the show and a comment if you wish. It really does help us get the show into the hands of more and more people. So I thank you in advance for that and pray that God would help us all to be the powerful and the inspired leaders He intends us to be. That's it for this episode of Inspired Leadership. You'll find a complete transcript of this episode on my website at www.ronkelleher.com. My prayer now is that you'll go out and be the powerful, inspired